The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
The worst thing that ever happened in the history of Maryland basketball was the death of Len Bias in June of 1986. This isn't even close to that. But Len Bias's death, after he had completed his eligibility, threw the program into a tailspin that it took years and years to get out of. This may just be a temporary bump in the road, but right now, there is real chaos with the Maryland basketball program and a lot of layers to what Kevin Wllard left behind, leaving town at midnight on a Saturday, much like the Baltimore Colts in those Mayflower vans back in 1984 when they went to Indianapolis. And how this gets sorted out is going to be fascinating to watch. But I'll tell you one thing, it has to happen quickly. And they have to have a coach in place by the end of the week, maybe by the middle of the week, because the way college basketball works right now, it's a fast-moving game of musical chairs. And there are over 1,300 players in the transfer portal right now, and that's where you find your talent. Rick Pitino has said he's not going to recruit high school guys anymore, and unless somebody like Cooper Flagg comes along, you're not going to hear about any big battles in recruiting for high schoolers. It's all going to be about players who have played, and they can play at all different levels. They can come from mid-majors, as we've seen. But this is the way it works, and you have to come armed with a lot of cash if you want to compete in this game. And there was a really good editorial, which I'll get to later in the show, from the president of St. Francis University, who basically said, hey, this NCAA thing was fun, but we're done. We're out of that. We're going to Division III. And I think you're going to see more and more mid-major schools go in that direction. And when the dust settles, where Maryland is going to stand, we'll have to see. But, boy, they were done no favors by Kevin Wllard. Not the fact that he left. That happens. It's the way that he left. And it seems like we've been talking about this for like 3 months. Do you realize that this was only 2 weeks ago yesterday?
He hired me. We're on the same page of what we...
Yep, let me get that right. This was only 2 weeks ago yesterday, Kevin Wllard, when it was announced that Maryland was going to play Grand Canyon in the NCAA tournament.
What I can tell you is Damon Evans and I, he hired me. We're on the same page of what we want to do for this program, what we want to do for this university. His focus and my focus are exactly the same. So our focus right now is strictly the NCAA tournament and this team. But all I can say to that is that me and Damon are on the same page, and we always have been.
That was March the 16th. Today is March the 31st. Just over 2 weeks on this. In that 2-week period, we had Kevin Wllard say, oh, yeah, Damon Evans and I, same page, want the same thing. We're moving forward. Pump your brakes on this story from John Rothstein of CBS Sports that Villanova is interested in Kevin Wllard. Not to worry about that. 4 days later, Kevin Wllard is complaining. He's saying, there's got to be some things that happened here. There's got to be some fundamental changes in the program. And on top of that, he burned down the house. He told you that the program was cheap, that he wanted to spend one more night in a hotel with his team around Christmas. I don't know how important that was to the players, but it was clearly important to him. And he was told there's not enough money to do that. And he said, I don't think accurately, from what I've gathered in reading these things, that they were near the bottom in NIL. They may not have been at the top, but I don't think they were near the bottom. And I don't think you get Derek Queen and you hang on to Julian Reese like you do unless you have some cash. You know, I think even if coaches around the country knew that Julian Reese could hit free throws, he'd be someplace else with a lot more money. But they had to pay money to keep him. So it wasn't like there was no cash. There was money there. They spent it. And overall, he did a good job. He got them to the Sweet 16. But he did a terrible job in his exit. So we went from that to going on the Kevin Sheehan show last week. It was only last Tuesday where he said, I'm here for now. And then to the midnight departure, for which that was not a shock. I mean, we pretty much figured on the comments that he'd made, even going back to the ones he made the week before last, about the program not having any money, and he couldn't compete the way he wanted to compete, and yada, yada, yada. And I don't even know who I'm going to be talking to because Damon Evans is gone, even though he wasn't gone at that point. So it wasn't that he left. It's the way that he left. And the last thing we heard from him as a Maryland coach there were lies. There's no other way to look at this. Again, no problem in leaving, but don't try and play us for fools as you're going out the door. This is after they lost to Florida, and he's at that point clearly had contact with Villanova. Clearly knows that he's going to go there. In fact, I'm going to read to you from a CBS story where he told somebody right after the game, "I'm out of here," and he's trying to make us believe. Moments after they lost to Florida, that there's still a chance he's going to be the Maryland coach.
No, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll just be honest with you. I haven't talked to my agent. I haven't talked to my wife. I made a promise to this team that I was going to just focus on this team, and that's all I've done. So I haven't talked to anybody. I have an agent. I'm sure he's talking to people because that's what agents like to do. But, I don't know.
Just follow up to that. Is there something at this juncture you think Maryland can do to bring you back?
Right now, my biggest concerns in life right now, I don't know who my boss is going to be. It's the guy that brought me here, who I really liked and appreciative of him bringing me to College Park, is not here anymore. And I don't know who we're going to hire. And that's, as in today's day and age, that worries me a little bit. I'm just being honest. My honesty got me in trouble. Might as well keep getting me in trouble. So this is going to be a family decision. I love College Park. I love Maryland. But when you're at this point in your career and you're looking at things, I have to take everything into consideration about what's moving forward. But I have not even talked to anybody, so I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. His agent is going around shopping for him, and he doesn't know who his agent is talking to. No chance of that. Because you got to find out if you want to go there. That's ridiculous. And he hadn't talked to his wife. His wife is going to find out at this news conference that he might leave. Oh, I'll have to tell the kids when they wake up that we might be moving. Daddy might be taking another job. Please. Then came up the question of Villanova, which at that point, this again was last Thursday night, everybody knew he was going to Villanova.
Is the Villanova, presumably, is that an option for you? Like, have they offered you
I have no idea.
And a follow-up for that, kind of what Kyle said, is there anything that the new administration and conversations they've had with you that would encourage you?
I'll be honest with you. My guy Brian Ullman deserves a raise because he has been phenomenal. The only person I've talked about my job is with that man over there wearing the muscle hat. He has been absolutely phenomenal. So, but I'm not even sure. I don't know if he's going to be here. So it's just one of those things. Right
now. Oh, come on. Really? Seriously. Oh, I love Brian Ullman. He's great, but I don't even know if he's going to be here. Well, if he's talking contract with you, there's got to be an assumption that what he's offering you, he's empowered to do, and they're not getting ready to fire him after they work out a deal with you. That's hard to get your head around. And then with all of this, with the incredible mess that he created, really taking a lot of the joy out of making the Sweet 16. You have any regrets?
Looking over the past week, do you wish you approached anything
Nope.
differently?
Not at all.
Last question here.
Lindsay Schnell, The Athletic. Kevin, I feel like a lot of times people demand that public figures be honest, and then when they are honest, to your point, sometimes you get in trouble. Today, when you guys left the team hotel, there were some fans that voiced their displeasure. Does that make you think at all about, do you want to be at Maryland?
Not at all. I got my guy. We would not be in the Sweet 16 if it wasn't for Harvey Sanders. Harvey Sanders runs our collective, does all the fundraising, has been instrumental in getting us back to where we are. And Hard gave me the biggest hug. So he matters. I understand fans are going to be pissed because I'm in limbo and this and that. I get it. Like, I'm kind of pissed, to be honest with you, because I didn't expect to be in this situation. But
all right. Harvey Sanders is the former chairman of Nautica. Everybody's got to have somebody like that if you're going to be successful in college basketball. You got to be funded, really. I mean, look at Rick Pitino at St. John's. He's funded by the guy who invented vitamin water and Under Armour or body armor and sold it to Coca-Cola for billions of dollars. You got to have somebody like that. Okay, so he's got that. But he, on one hand, he's saying we don't have any money. On the other hand, he's saying we got there because somebody funded me with money. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. And, you know, the exit, if you haven't heard this a million times, I'm going to play it again. This is exactly what he said as he was leaving Seton Hall. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Kevin, there's been a lot of rumors in the last day or so of you potentially going to Maryland. Do you want to kind of comment on whether that's accurate or not?
I'll give you exactly what I can tell you. I have an agent who I haven't talked to yet. I don't know who he's talking to. I have absolutely no idea, but when I get home tomorrow, I'll talk to my agent and discuss things with my agent.
He better be happy at Villanova, or more importantly, the people who hired him better hope that he's happy in Villanova. Otherwise, 3 years from now, March of 2028, we may hear the old song and dance again. Oh, I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody. I haven't talked to my agent. I haven't talked to my wife. I don't know what I'm going to do. That's how he goes. That's his move. And for now, he's happy. We'll see how that all works out. There's terrific reporting done by John Talty at CBS Sports over the weekend. If you've not read this story, I'm going to go through the highlights of it for you to just understand how it all went down here. He got to Maryland and started complaining right away, it appears. He did make the tournament in his first year, and they lost in the second round to Alabama. It was a lopsided defeat. They lost by 18 points to a team that had been ranked number one a good part of the year. And, gets back to campus and starts complaining about the scheduling, the emphasis on college basketball versus football at Maryland, which he had to know when he got to Maryland. Now, he never had that before because his previous stops had been at Iona and at Seton Hall for 12 years, where football, if they had it, it didn't matter. It's a different story here. They're in the Big Ten, and as people have said to John Talty, 80 to 90% of the money coming to the program, for the athletic program, goes to football. That's where the money goes because that's where the television money is. That's why they're in the Big Ten, because the combination of Baltimore and Washington as a market would rank them number 4 in the country. When he was complaining about this, complaining about the travel and that basketball didn't seem to matter as much as football there, that didn't raise any alarms, says John Talty. Probably should have. Mark Turgeon also did some complaining. And Mark Turgeon, I never really thought was a fit here because he wasn't an East Coast guy. I think he was a pretty good coach. I think a lot of people rip him, but I would look at his record and say he got you to the tournament on a fairly regular basis, and he got you to the Sweet 16 once. Did he do what Gary did? No. Did he do what Lefty did? No. But he was a pretty good coach, but his personality really didn't fit here. And he came in thinking he was in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and then after 3 years on the job, they made the move to the Big Ten. He wasn't happy about that. The hope was that Wllard would settle in and that he would bring the program back to the heights that it reached under Gary Williams in the early part of the century. In hindsight, though, Willard's comparisons to the Big East should have been a sign that this was a basketball school that he perceived didn't devote enough resources to his basketball team. And he never really seemed satisfied in the 3 years that he was here. And here comes the Villanova offer, which is exactly what he wants. It's a program that does not have big-time football. All the money goes to the basketball, or the bulk of it. And he doesn't have to worry about being second fiddle to a football program that, let's face it, is never going to compete for the national title. The basketball program is expected to do that, and he wants the resources that he wants. And I guess Villanova is going to give it to him. The complaining that he did about, not staying in the hotel in Brooklyn the extra night, so what? The players didn't care about that. And, by the way, it wasn't like Christmas Eve. It was the 21st of December. So, what, are they going to ride a tour bus and look at the lights in the Macy's window, get on the Staten Island ferry. These guys want to go home. They got money. They don't need you to put them up for another night in New York. They want to go to New York. They got the money to do it and stay in any hotel they want to. Christmas anecdote, writes John Talty, was especially petty, the result of a simmering feud with then Deputy AD Colleen Sorum, who has since taken over as interim AD in a move that especially rankled Wllard. Sorum, who ran day-to-day operations of the department under Evans, once told me, John Talty, that's Damon Evans, there is just not enough money in the pie. I worry about revenue. I worry about staff. I worry about keeping our staff and being able to fill slots when they open. Sorum's job was to balance the budget, evoking ire from Wllard when she turned down his requests, including the extra night in New York. Like, he wanted, I think it was more of a power play than anything else. Like, I'd like to stay another night. No, there's not enough money. What do you mean there's not enough money? Damon Evans, was a football player at Georgia, so he knows about big-time football. But according to this story, privately admitted to one prominent booster that Maryland would never compete for a national championship in football. Of course not. Yeah, and they could, in fact, do it in basketball, which they have done, making a pair of Final Fours and winning a national championship. Evans believed the football program had to be viable if Maryland were to be included in any long-rumored breakaway into a super conference. And by the way, that's the way things are going to go here. And these mid-major programs, God bless them, but they're not going to be in this league anymore. What you're going to have are these 2 or 3 super conferences, and if your football's strong enough, you can get it. You can't get in on basketball alone. You cannot do that. Football generates 80 to 90% of TV revenue, Evans told me in a previous interview. So that big billion-dollar contract from our multimedia rights partners, a lot of that's attributed to football. That doesn't mean that basketball is not significant, because it's super significant here. Basketball makes a lot of money here, but we need to understand what drives that. Yeah, and that's where the problem is starting to sink in for Maryland. When they went to the Big Ten in 2015, when Debbie Yao, had spent a lot of money on the football program and they were bleeding money and they had to cancel sports, they went there for money. And it made sense. They got a lot more money, kept some programs alive, and, they could fill the football stadium at least once a year when Michigan and Ohio State came in. So that made sense. But now we're seeing the chickens come home to roost, because Maryland has always been a basketball school, will always be a basketball school, and they're playing in a conference where football matters and basketball is very secondary. Kevin Wllard jumped to a school in a conference where only basketball matters. Can't blame him for that. Just don't like the way he exited. Maryland spent in the neighborhood of $3 million in NIL for this year's roster, which would put them in the lower part of the top half of the Big Ten, according to Harry Geller, the founder of Maryland Basketball Collective Turtle NIL. I went to high school with Harry Geller, BCC High School. He was in my class. In fact, we played together on the offensive line on very bad football teams. Harry Geller, I would not have expected him to have had this kind of success. Not that I could tell anything when, we're 16, 17 years old, but good for him. And I would say this about Harry. Harry grew up in this area, so he understands the history of Maryland basketball, which I'll get into in a little bit. But Geller said that Evans not being more heavily involved in trying to help Maryland's basketball NIL situation deeply frustrated Wllard, who was upset at the administration's inaction. So there you go. There's confirmation that he wanted Damon Evans out of here, despite him saying, he brought me here. We're on the same page. We're all together. No. Get Damon Evans out of here, and he made sure of that in that news conference before the Grand Canyon game to open up the tournament, in saying, I guess he's out of here. I went to SMU. Even though it hadn't been announced yet, that was to make sure he didn't make a U-turn. Geller talked about Harvey Sanders, who you heard Wllard mention, the former Nautica chairman, and Geller said, when Brian Ullman became involved, things got better, but we were way behind at that point. Wllard wanted a bigger piece of the $20.5 million revenue share, highlighting a fight that is brewing on college campuses across the country as an April settlement of House versus NCAA looms. And that's how they're going to hopefully get their arms around this. But a big-time football school, the biggest of the big-timers, Georgia has already announced this. If it's $20 million, $13.5 goes to football. A couple million goes to basketball. That's the way it's going to work. Maryland was willing to give Wllard, it says here, a $4.5 million revenue share even before he publicly demanded more, according to sources, which would have been the second highest number for a Big Ten men's basketball program behind only Indiana. See, Indiana's very similar. Now, they had a great football season this year. Kirk Cignetti came in from JMU and gave them unexpected success. But they're a basketball school. They're like Maryland. They're one of a handful of schools in the country where winning a basketball championship is bigger than a football championship. So if you're right behind Indiana, which has an even more storied past in basketball than Maryland, you're not in that bad a shape, Wllard. You're not really scraping the bottom there, okay? That's an important point to make here. And it says here the expectation is that the majority of the high major men's basketball programs will be in the $2 to $4 million range in revenue sharing, putting Maryland above all but a handful of programs. But at Villanova, if the number here is going to be $2 to $4 million, at Villanova, because all the money goes to basketball, Wllard will have about $6 million to work with. And that's the game now. That's the way the game is played. You got the most money, you bring in the best players. More from and this is some really salacious stuff here from boosters. Bruce Gossett, if you've ever been out to a Maryland football game, you know the Gossett Fieldhouse. He's a big-time booster. He put $52 million into the new basketball facility, which is going to open in the fall. So whoever comes in as a coach, he's not going to have to practice anymore at Xfinity Center. He's going to have his own basketball facility, which you pretty much have to have now to be at the top of the game. But Gossett has donated millions and millions, $50 million to his alma mater. And here's what he said. As far as I'm concerned with Kevin leaving, I think it's good. It was just chaos. And it was chaos with Wllard saying, you know, what he said after the game. And then, according to this story, telling at least one person close to him, I'm out of here. So after saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, according to this story, he says to somebody who's close to him, yeah, I'm out of here. And I think everybody knew that when he was saying what he did. The upside of this, according to Harry Geller, I think this got the attention of the top administration about what we really needed to do, run a top basketball program. So in the end, that is good. Well, I guess if you're looking for a silver lining in that, it brought attention to this. But the picture that was painted by Kevin Wllard was not accurate, that they weren't at the bottom of the NIL, and that they were willing to make a significant commitment to him. But, and I understand this, that's why I have no problem with him leaving. I've left for better jobs in my life. I understand you probably have too. It's an understanding. People should be free to go where they want to go. But you don't burn the house down on your way out, and that's what he did. You know, he took a big swing at this program, and how they recover remains to be seen. But they're way behind right now. They don't have an athletic director, and they don't have a coach. And, yes, you want to swing big, and hopefully they get a big name here. And you're hearing Buzz Williams from Texas A&M, who used to coach at Virginia Tech. He may be involved. It's got to be somebody at that level. And as good a coaches as Tony Skinn, who did a great job at George Mason this year, and Dwayne Simpkins, an alum who did a great job at AU, getting him in the tournament for the first time in 11 years, as good a coaches as they may become, you can't hire either one now because either one will be seen as a big yawn. And I don't think in an era where you have to have people kick in big money to have a competitive program, I don't think rich people are going to be running to contribute cash to either of those coaches, as good as they may become down the line. And you also heard that a couple of players like Grievous Vasquez and Steve Blake have thrown their hat in the ring. I mean, that's nice nostalgia. Shouldn't happen. They don't have coaching experience. So they're in a pickle right now. And they can thank Kevin Wllard for helping to put them there, though I would say this in retrospect, and this may not be popular. Given where they were at the time, he was a good hire. And he did a good job. He got them to the tournament twice. He got them to the Sweet 16. But his exit was horrific. It was horrible. And that's what he should be hated for. Not that you look at it and say, oh, man, did Maryland make a mistake by hiring? No, they didn't make a mistake. But in what happened as they were achieving great success on the court was as ugly as anything that has happened at Maryland post-Len bias. That's how bad it was for the basketball program. All right, coming up, John Rothstein, who broke this story. He had some thoughts on it last night on CBS. We'll get to that. Plus, Barry Zerluga had some really good points in his column today. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I'm going to give you a little history lesson on Maryland basketball, which I think is important in taking a look at what's going on here with Kevin Wllard leaving them in a lurch. And the situation at this level, not out of perspective, but in relation to Maryland basketball, it's a very chaotic situation which they need to resolve quickly, but they need to swing big. Bringing in Tony Skinn, nice coach, great job at George Mason, Dwayne Simpkins, alum, great job at American University. This is not the time for that. This is the time because college basketball is now year to year. The program you have one year may look totally different than the one you had from the year before. Deshaun Harris-Smith was a player that Maryland highly recruited out of Paul VI a few years ago, and he has not turned out to be good enough for that level. He is probably going to wind up, from what I read, at Quinnipiac, a mid-major program, which is probably where he belongs. What we saw from Julian Reese, that was unusual, but it was also helped by money. They had money to keep him. And again, if coaches around the country knew that he could shoot free throws, I don't think he would still be at Maryland because somebody would have offered him a hell of a lot more money. You totally remake your team year to year. So what you look like one year doesn't really have any bearing on what it looks like the next. But how did they get to this point? How did they get from, because I don't think anybody really saw this coming other than people who were really inside the program and were listening to the carping that was going on from Kevin Wllard about the things that he wanted and the things that he wasn't getting. I think when this story broke a week ago Sunday on the 16th that Kevin Wllard was on the radar for Villanova, I was like, well, that's nice. They're looking for a coach, and they're looking at names. And Kevin Wllard has a lot of experience in the Big East. He played at Pitt, coached 12 years at Seton Hall. That's a name. But look what he's done in Maryland. He rebuilt the program. They went to the tournament twice. They're in the Sweet 16. He's got things rolling. Well, that really wasn't the real picture. And John Rothstein is the one that broke this. He's on CBS and discussed the aftermath last night on TV.
2 weeks ago on Selection Sunday, I reported that Maryland was working on a contract extension to present to Kevin Wllard that would make him one of the top 10 highest paid coaches in college basketball. Kevin Wllard received that term sheet, and then right after, his AD, Damon Evans, opted to take the head coaching job at SMU. That sent things into a frenzy. Kevin Wllard was near the top of Villanova's desired wish list for the entirety of this process. What started to happen as things started to play out in the media was one of the main reasons why Kevin Wllard was so attracted to the opportunity to coach and lead Villanova's program was because of the NIL opportunities that Villanova's commitment to men's basketball as a Big East school moving forward in this new landscape can provide. The last couple of days, according to many people I spoke to, one of the main things that Kevin Wllard was wrestling with when Maryland was trying to do everything it could to keep him as the Terps head coach, including offering him a deal that would pay him over $5 million annually, was at the end of the day now, you need a certain number for your budget to put together a team that's capable of going far in the NCAA tournament and potentially going to a Final Four or winning a national championship. And in this new landscape, as of now, because things are always changing, the ceiling and the commitment financially is significantly more at Villanova than it was at Maryland.
I know that that's the case for Big East schools going forward because of the revenue sharing model and spreading it out.
Yes.
But what about at Big East schools like Villanova who do have football? Because the other Big East schools...
There's not the commitment. I talked to several people at Villanova this week who assured me, and they weren't like looking at a list and had the numbers, but they said Villanova's commitment and what it has spent the last couple of years and what it will spend moving forward will be competitive with the top programs in the country for what it's going to take to get Villanova back to the national level. And look, I want to say this again, and I said it, earlier in the week. I'm going to say it again. Yeah. The standard that Jay Wright set his last 10 years, from the start of the 2013-14 season to when he retired in 2022, cannot be the standard for Kevin Wllard as the next head coach of Villanova. The standard, if you look at Villanova, should be to make the NCAA tournament every single year and then obviously be in position to make big runs. Now, you look at the history of this program. Rolly Massimino won a national championship in 1985, went to several Elite Eights, but he won the national championship as an 8 seed. Our colleague Steve Lapis had great teams in the mid-1990s. You look, won the Big East tournament in 1995. 3 seed in 95, 3 seed in 96, also was a 4 seed in 97. Jay Wright's last 10 years cannot be the barometer for this team. You can't compare what he did his last 10 years moving forward. But Villanova, especially with a capable coach like Kevin Wllard now as the steward of this program, should now aim to be an NCAA tournament team every single year.
Well, you know what, John? I don't want to take the pressure off of Kevin Wllard because the way he walked out of Maryland and walked up 95 to Villanova, he should have those expectations because what you just described for Villanova is the standard for Maryland. It's to make the tournament every year and sometimes make a deep run. And he had that here. So if he's gone to Villanova, don't say, oh, don't put too much pressure on him. No, he doesn't have to live up to the standards of Jay Wright. Yeah, he does. He does because he opened up his big yap and he basically told everybody, I got no chance here at Maryland. They don't give me enough money. They don't give me enough resources. You know, they care more about their football team. So too bad. I left that in there because I want you to understand what he's talking about there. That you want to take the pressure off of Kevin Wllard, Gesundheit, you know, go for it. Go with God because that is not something that anybody at Maryland should be concerned about. Here's the issue now, moving forward, and I think Barry's Reluga, who did not grow up here. Give him credit for this. He talks to a lot of people. He's learned a lot. He grew up in Boston. He's been here about 20 years. Does a great job as a columnist. But the headline is exactly right. Terps must make position a destination for coaches. And he says it's one thing, and he's talking about how Wllard left here. It's one thing to move to a new house. It's another to point out the outdated kitchen and peeling paint on the one you're abandoning. Maryland shouldn't be a stepping stone in men's basketball. It should be a destination. 100% right. He says you need to hire a coach who wants to finish his career in College Park. And here are the numbers that when I refer to Maryland as being one of a few schools where a basketball championship means more than a football championship, Barry's got it here. He says the Washington Post looked at this and found that Maryland is one of 4 power schools, those in the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and Big 12, whose men's basketball program drew more fans from their basketball program than the football program. The others, Syracuse, Kansas, and Duke. Combined national titles for those 4 programs in men's basketball, 10. Last national title in football, 1959. Those are basketball schools. Yeah, so there's where they are. Syracuse, Kansas, Duke, Maryland. That's it. That's the list. So that's how they have to be viewed. And any coach that comes here has to understand that, yes, they have to pay a lot of attention to football, and football brings in most of the revenue. But basketball is putting people in the seats here. I mean, that's one thing. Mike Locksley's had pretty good success. He had 3 straight years of making bowl games and winning bowl games. But attendance outside of Big Ten games that draw fans from the other teams, not that good. Not that good. And basketball, especially I was at the Michigan State game, it was an incredible environment. So that's an understanding of what the job is. They have to find somebody who can fill that. If you look at the history of Maryland basketball in the modern era, I'm not talking about going back to the 50s and the early 60s. I'm talking about since Lefty Driesell arrived on campus in 1969, and he was one of 2 top candidates for the job. The other one was Morgan Wooten, one of the greatest high school coaches ever at DeMatha. And I think Morgan is a great coach, probably would have had pretty good teams, maybe even teams that were competitive for the national championship, like Lefty's teams. But he didn't have the flair for showmanship that Lefty did. And Lefty not only changed basketball in this area, he changed it nationally. He's the one that came up with Midnight Madness, and you know, he'd come out on the floor and give the victory sign. He's the one that looked at Cole Fieldhouse and said, why are there no seats on the floor? Oh, well, it was built for boxing. It wasn't built that way. He put seats on the floor. He made Maryland basketball. have zip, and they won. And when they had big games at Cole Fieldhouse, you can criticize Lefty for his coaching, and a lot of people did. But in building a basketball program, he built something that people paid attention to here, and nationally as well. And he was, if not the greatest recruiter ever, he was one of the greatest. He got Tom McMillan, who was only the second high school player ever on the cover of Sports Illustrated. In the biggest recruiting battle ever, at least up until that time, he got Moses Malone. Now, he only got him for a day because he went to the ABA, but he got him. And so his what he said, where he said, you know, Jay McMillan had said to him, hey, you can make this the UCLA of the East. He damn near did it. And so that program was in great shape. The tragic death of Len Bias changed a lot of things. Lefty was forced out the door before the start of the 1986-87 season. And the chancellor was John Slaughter. And John Slaughter decided that he was going to hire a black coach. Nothing wrong with that. But he hired Bob Wade, who had no college coaching experience. Wade was a terrific coach in Baltimore in high school. He was in over his head. The team didn't win, and ultimately he lied to the NCAA about a minor violation, which put them on 2 years probation. That program was a mess when Gary Williams got here. Now, he didn't know that he was going to be banned from postseason play and television for a couple of years, but he knew the program needed some big-time help. And, you know, almost without the Bob Wade era, I'm not sure that they get Gary, because Gary was in great shape at Ohio State. Ohio State had a winning program. They had and maybe still have the highest athletic budget in the country, thanks greatly to their success in football. But Gary had money. He had a great place to play. He was in the Big Ten. He got a player named Jim Jackson, who was recruited to go there for the 1989 season, 89-90 season. He had a team that could compete for the national championship, and he felt his alma mater needed him, and he came back. And on top of that, when he was hit with probation that he didn't know was coming, he knew that there was going to be an investigation, and he told the school, get outside legal counsel. And they said, no, we'll use our own lawyers. What happens? They dropped the bomb on Maryland, no postseason play and no TV. He managed to convince Walt Williams to stay, which was a stroke of brilliance. Walt kept them at least competitive, and then Gary eventually rebuilt and then had the national championship team in 2002. But when the probation hit, and many guys would have done this, Gary did not. But Dave Gavitt, who was the commissioner of the Big East, he created that, made the marriage with ESPN, made the Big East what the Big East was, and had a long-term relationship with Gary going back to when Gary was at BC. He said to him, I can get you to the Celtics as an assistant coach if you want to do it. And who wouldn't have been tempted to do it? But Gary stayed. He stayed. And he went through the lean times. And he went through people ripping him. People don't remember this, but in the 90s, when they were getting to the tournament and they weren't getting to the Final Four, the arguments that I used to have with people I worked with and callers on the phone who said, get rid of Gary. Well, yeah, people are impatient. And fortunately, they didn't. And he stayed. And so here we are. Now, when he retired, and there were a lot of reasons that he retired. One was he was in his upper 60s, but there were things that were happening in the program that were not as under his control as he would have liked. And he thought it was a good time to check out. He'd done everything he could possibly do, 2 Final Fours and a national title, and he's now in the Hall of Fame and should be in the Hall of Fame. But when he retired, they wanted to get Sean Miller, and Sean Miller wound up going to Arizona, or maybe he was at Arizona, I forget. And they took Mark Turgeon, who was a good coach, but he really didn't have the personality. And talk about a guy who had one eye out the door or out the window, however you want to term it. He was from Kansas. He played at Kansas. That was his dream job. I think his plan was to do well at Maryland and have the opportunity to go to Kansas. Now, Bill Self has been there forever, and Bill Self won a national title, so he's good. He gets to stay. But I think that was his dream job. And like the story said in CBS, that he was put out that they were having to go from the ACC to the Big Ten. He thought it was an ACC job where basketball matters a lot more than it does in the Big Ten. He wasn't happy about that, and he just didn't have the personality for it. And I really thought that Kevin Wllard did have the personality for it. He had the chip on his shoulder that Gary had. He was a sarcastic New Yorker. Gary's sarcastic. He's from South Jersey. I mean, they had some similarities to him. And in the 3 years, he did a good job coaching the team. But behind the scenes, he was very unhappy, and the exit he made was one of the most disgraceful you'll ever see from a coach. And that's the beef that I have with him. Yeah, go ahead. Find yourself another job. But don't torch the one that you have before you go out the door. And don't string everybody along during what's a great run in the NCAA tournament. Don't ruin that. Don't ruin that for the fan base. Don't ruin that for the players. And he did that. But going for another job, hey, this is the way sports are these days in college. It's professional sports, and unlike professional sports, there are no contracts. You know, like, and you're going to play this from Jay Billis coming up. Jay Billis said, there was tampering that went on here. Clearly, Villanova was talking to a coach who was under contract at Maryland for 4 more years, and they were making a deal while he was still under contract. They didn't ask permission to do it. They just did it. Now, there's a buyout in the deal, so, it wouldn't be like if Maryland wanted to fire him for cause. He'd be happy to do that, so he wouldn't have to pay the buyout. But, if you don't have rules in place, you're subject to this kind of thing. And unfortunately, they got bit by a guy who was an opportunist and a liar on his way out the door. Too bad. So here we are. We got 9 games left, and Ovechkin keeps getting closer and closer.
Here's a tip from Ovechkin. And a shot here from the outside, and it's in front, and they score, and Alex Ovechkin got it. The tip of the shot from the left point. The Great H has 890 goals. It's 6-4. He needs 5 to pass Wayne Grtezky for the all-time record.
John Walton yesterday on the Caps radio network. That was in a loss, an 8-5 loss to Buffalo, and the Caps are struggling. Not a big deal because they've already clinched a playoff spot, and they're already at home for the first round at least. Yeah, would you like to win the President's Cup? Fine. They've won the President's Cup before, haven't made it to the finals or even past the first rounds. I don't know how much of a difference that makes, but you want to be playing good hockey as you go into the playoffs. So I don't know how big a concern that is. I think for casual fans, most of us, it's about the chase. And he's got 38 goals in 57 games, only 57 games played. Miraculously, he's back and better than ever, as the old Greenberg saying goes. He's back after the broken leg and hasn't missed a beat. He's got 38 goals, 57 games. At that rate, they're projecting him to break the record at home against the Islanders on April 15th, which is, let me check that. That's at the Islanders, which brings up an interesting question. Everything can change with a hat trick or even a 2-goal game or a drought. He could go 4 games without a goal. But there are the 9 games, only 3 of them are at home. They're playing at Boston tomorrow and at Carolina on Thursday. Then they play at home on Friday night against Chicago. I think, especially if he scores a goal, maybe 2 in the next couple of games, that's the first time we're going to see Gary Bettman and Wayne Grtezky show up together. They're going to tour as they go through the rest of the season because they want to be there, obviously, for the record breaker. So after the Chicago game, then they go on the road to the Islanders on the 6th of April. Then they're home on the 10th against Carolina. And if you look at the prices on StubHub, you'll see that tickets for that are very expensive. Then they got a back-to-back, so home and home. They go at Columbus on the 12th, and then they're home on the 13th, which is the last home game. If you're going by that projection of what pace he's on, the projection is he breaks it against the Islanders. I've said this for the last couple of weeks, and I wonder if they will go through with this strategy, or will they just say, hey, if it happens on the road, so be it. They won the Stanley Cup on the road in 2018. If he breaks the record on the road, that's the way it is. I think most people would like to see him do it at home, but who knows? But my feeling is if he's short of the record going into those last 2 games where they go to the Islanders and to Pittsburgh for the last 2, I wonder if they sit him out for the playoffs. We had this with Hank Aaron. In 1973, he ended the season a home run short of Babe Ruth's record. He had 713 career home runs. And they opened up the season on the road, the Braves, I think it was at Cincinnati. And he played in the first and second games, hit a home run in one of them. And then they said they were sitting him out in the Sunday game. And then Commissioner Bowie Kuhn said, oh, no, we're going to fine you. Well, I think they took the fine, or maybe he played, I forget. But he didn't hit a home run. And then they had the unbelievable experience of the nation being able to see this. See, baseball didn't really concentrate on marketing as much as they do now. I mean, this was like a different era. But they rescheduled the national TV broadcast, so it was Kurt Gowdy and forget who was doing the games with. Maybe it's Joe Garagiola. But they did it on a Monday night in 1974. It was against the Dodgers, and he hit the home run, and people remember watching it. The nation was watching as Hank Aaron broke a record that was thought to be unbreakable for a long time. And the incredible call by Vin Scully, which was not on television. This was Dodger radio, but it was the best call of all. And he says, an amazing thing is happening. A black man is being applauded in the Deep South for a record that was broken, that was held forever by a baseball icon. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but that's what he was able to convey to his audience in Los Angeles. And later the call went out. Milo Hamilton, the Braves guy, had a good call as well. But this would be something that they could build up for the entire offseason. Alex Ovechkin breaking the record. And if I were hockey, the way I would do that is I would load up the front half of the season with home games. I'd have him spend the first week at home if he's only like a goal or two short. Get it done there. I don't think they would have some juice now, maybe a little bit more juice than they would in the teeth of football season when the next season would open. But I just think the offseason to build the whole thing up would be really cool. And, to think that at the age of 39, that in 57 games, he's got 38 goals, that's almost an average of 3/4 of a goal a game, 0.67. That's pretty remarkable. And he looks like he could go for all. Now, he's sort of indicating that next season is going to be it. That's the last year of his contract, and he's said that he's not going to sign another deal. But, when you get closer to the end and you realize what a jolt it's going to be, as they say, athletes die 2 deaths, once when they've stopped playing and the other when they actually die, what he might do. But we have been witness to something absolutely remarkable, and all credit to Ted for doing this, because at the time it seemed crazy. But when they gave him a 13-year contract, you're thinking, what are they doing here? This is a guy who plays recklessly. He's slamming people into the boards. Off the ice, he seemed reckless as well. He's seen really driving fast and things like that. But I would say this, that he's learned how to really take care of his body. He got married. That seemed to settle him down. He's got a couple of kids. And if he gets it done by the end of this season, that would be terrific. And if it happens in one of these last 2 home games, either Carolina on the 10th or Columbus on the 13th, that would be great. If not, they're going to have an interesting decision to make for those last couple of games of the season. But, it's too bad that it was happening while the NCAA tournament was going on, although the game yesterday afternoon was kind of a dog. It was a blowout for Auburn pretty much. But, okay, at least Alex Ovechkin is continuing what he needs to do and stay on track. All right, coming up in the next hour, a little bit more on the Kevin Wllard situation, and wait till you hear what Charles Barkley has to say about the Stephen A. LeBron feud. Kids, knock it off. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. So in the sports radio business, this gets trotted out from time to time, especially during slow periods. Who's on the Mount Rushmore of D.C. area coaches? It's almost always 3 basketball coaches and Joe Gibbs. It's Gibbs, it's Gary Williams, it's Lefty Driesell, and it's John Thompson. And there really isn't a lot of debate on that. If you're just keeping it to basketball coaches, you maybe put Morgan Wooten in there, one of the greatest high school basketball coaches ever. But this is a college basketball area in a big city, which is not common. St. John's is relevant again under Rick Pitino. It had been many years since they'd been relevant under Louis Carnesecca, and that was during the heyday of the Big East. Chicago, no. I mean, DePaul has had some good years, and maybe Northwestern making the tournament a few years ago, but nothing on the level of this. And when you look at the Maryland basketball job, the two most successful coaches that they've had, one is an alum and felt an obligation to his university and delivered big time with 2 Final Fours and a national championship in Gary Williams. And the other is Lefty Driesell, who was not local, but he understood the ACC. He played at Duke, and he had coached at Davidson and had recruited a number of the players that wound up going to places like North Carolina and Duke, and in some cases Maryland. And so he had an understanding of Maryland. And when he came here and looked not what the now was, but the future was, like all great people who achieve great things, they project down the line what they want it to be, and that's what he did. He built a big time program here, and then Gary, because of having played at Maryland, and then he'd been an assistant coach there at one point. He came back, and it was a job that he wanted to keep for the rest of his life. He'd already had great success. He'd done well at American. He'd done well at BC, and he could have stayed at Ohio State as long as he wanted to with the biggest athletic budget in the country. But he left to go to Maryland because he had the local ties. And of course, John Thompson, he didn't go to Georgetown, but he's a D.C. guy. He grew up in D.C., Washington, D.C. It's his home. And so when the Georgetown job came open, he also didn't look at the now. This was a program probably on the level of what AU would be now. And he said, okay, I want to have a big-time program. And even before he got in the Big East, he recruited big. I mean, he got some big local stars. You know, John Duran was a big local star. Craig Big Sky Shelton, a big local star. He got him to stay home. And he built Georgetown into a power team even before the Big East got off the ground in 1979. And, of course, when that happened, that was the biggest conference in the country. For basketball, they had 3 teams in the Final Four 40 years ago. So there was local stuff there. And there's a couple of people who have thrown their hat in the ring who have local ties. Gravis Vasquez, I don't know how serious he is about that. Steve Blake also put out yesterday he'd like to coach. Dwayne Simpkins would be a name that you would look at, having done well at American University, a great player at Maryland. And Tony Skinn, who was a former Maryland assistant and has done a really good job at his alma mater, team he took to the Final Four as a player. That's Tony Skinn. But I think you have to look beyond that, but you have to look at guys who look at Maryland as a place where they will finish their coaching careers. Kevin Wllard came here maybe thinking that he would do that, but it wasn't long before he went, oh, wait a minute, you have football here. I didn't have football at Seton Hall. You mean football, that the football team that makes the Mayo Bowl, and that's considered a good season? I mean, they get a lot more money than I do? No. So now he's at a place where he gets, as we said about John Feinstein, the whole duck. He gets the whole duck there at Villanova, and I hope he's happy. But in looking for a replacement, they got to find somebody at a big-time level, somebody at least as accomplished as Kevin Wllard when he got here, having had good teams at Seton Hall and teams that got to the tournament, though he never made a Sweet 16. That's what you have to look to. Coaches learning on the job, stepping stone like it apparently was for Wllard, no. Those days have to be over. Pete Thamel covers college sports for ESPN. He was on yesterday on their SportsCenter show with Reese Davis. Here's his look at the Maryland situation.
For Villanova basketball pushing forward, Reese, this is a really big hire. They bring in a proven winner in the Big East. Look, Villanova has been on the front end of NIL. They built out a modern front office. They have a new athletic director, Eric Riddell, who has a lot of basketball experience from his time at Oregon. They're going to take an Oregon football type mentality to Villanova basketball. So pushing forward for Villanova, a place where basketball is the only real focus of the athletic department, this is a big win, and it's clearly what Kevin Wllard wanted, as he said over and over for the past 9 days.
No, look, I understand that. As a basketball coach, you go to a place like Villanova that's won championships recently. Basketball is their primary focus. Totally get the draw there. So now, what's next for Maryland?
Well, that's a great question, Reese. They're a little bit like a country music song right now. They lost their coach, they lost their AD, and they're going to be out searching in a drier market because they're coming in late in the cycle. There's really two paths they can take. They can mobilize some of that Big Ten and Under Armour money and go try to get a Final Four coach. You see Porter Moser there, you see Buzz Williams. Those have been two guys who believe to be gettable in this cycle. The other thing they can do is go local. Obviously, Tony Skinn has had a great run at George Mason and has deep ties there. And Dwayne Simpkins is a great former player who's really been at Maryland and shown promise as a young coach at American. The thought going with someone like Skinn or Simpkins is you could get the deal done quick and you could mobilize some of that money for players, which, as we move forward in this era of college basketball, becomes the priority.
Yeah, and that's the key. I mean, they are behind the eight ball now. On one hand, going to the Sweet 16 was fun to watch, but they're a week late because Wllard was gone. He was gone as soon as Maryland's season ended. And if that Queen shot doesn't bank in or he gets called for walking, which, wasn't going to happen, but if that shot doesn't go, he's been gone for a week, and there's probably a replacement now. But by going an extra week into the Sweet 16, now they're in a position where they got to catch up in the portal and they got to catch up in the coaching go-round. This was a discussion yesterday. Seth Greenberg and Jay Billis on the same show with Reese Davis about why this happened and what it means going forward for Maryland. This is Greenberg first.
And everyone's going to compare it to, well, players get chastised for moving school to school or putting their name in the portal at a certain time, and coaches can do it any time. And I agree with that. Here's my exception. Kevin Wllard is going to pay a hefty, not a small, a hefty buyout when he moves to Villanova. Whether Villanova pays it or he pays it, someone is going to pay it. And that's why we need contracts in college basketball. We need 2-year contracts so we can get the portal under control and we can have some type of accountability and connection. Having said it, that's the right place for Kevin Wllard.
Right, maybe so, but one might argue, Bill, sort of bring you in, one might argue then you have contracts, but apparently they don't mean anything. And again,
I'm not saying I don't. That's why you have a clause for buyout.
You end up buying it, but it doesn't.
That's why you have a
what
contract.
I'm saying is it doesn't limit the movement. So I don't have any problem with Wllard taking a job that he perceives to be better, that he feels like is going to give him a better chance to be successful at the way he defines success. I mean, it's I don't have a problem with it at all, but it just seems an odd way it goes. What did you think of the way it all unfolded?
It's more of the same. What you heard from Kevin Wllard from the podium in his press conferences was, I haven't talked to my agent. I don't know what's going on. So I don't know. He said the exact same thing when he was at Seton Hall and then went to Maryland. The exact same thing. This is the same playbook. And I hate to break this to coaches, but your agent is your representative. So whatever your agent is doing, you are doing. That's the way agency works. But to Seth's point, I don't have a problem with Kevin Wllard making this move. That's great. Any coach should look to better himself or herself based upon the circumstances and based upon business. These are business decisions. But one thing you don't hear from the NCAA literati, from the administrators, from Charlie Baker, you don't hear tampering. Nobody's saying there was tampering here. This is a coach under contract that a member institution tampered with without permission from the University of Maryland. You don't hear about loyalty. Where was Kevin Willard's loyalty here? He made a decision to go to Maryland and signed a long-term contract. Where's the commitment that we hear on the part of players? And what about going through adversity? Like, he didn't want to go through adversity, the adversity of, he couldn't stay in New York for an extra day. Like, come on, man. We say all this stuff about players, but we don't apply that to coaches. That's a contradiction to the point of hypocrisy. I'm not saying, hey, don't go. Go ahead. But let's not apply these ridiculous rules to the players. It's just not right. And Seth's right. I've been saying this for over a decade now. Sign the players to contracts. Negotiate at arm's length with the players, or negotiate a collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. The difference here, and Jay brings up a great point about the tampering. In college basketball, it's different than the NFL, where not all jobs are equal, but they're in the same league. You have a salary cap that's the same for all teams, et cetera, et cetera. So if a coach wants to leave to go to another job, he's got to get fired from it. Or there's an agreement between ownership and the coach that he can leave. But in college basketball, with these buyouts, and it's understandable at a mid-major school that a coach isn't going to want to sign a contract that doesn't have a buyout, because when he has an opportunity to get a big job, he wants to be able to go. So the buyouts are relatively small in those places. As you go up the line, some of the buyouts are bigger. And, it's discouraging to leave. But in some cases, the school doesn't care. They'll pay whatever it takes to get a guy there. So it's a different situation. But when you have this, then, what's the big deal with tampering? What's the penalty for it? Oh, we found out you were talking to another school. You're fired with cause. Good. I want to go anyway, and I don't have to pay the buyout. So that's what the buyout creates here. And it creates a situation where there clearly is tampering, but it's tampering that doesn't matter with the buyout. You just leave and you pay your way out. And that's what the big difference is here. And how that gets resolved, I don't know. But he's right. Coaches can move freely, and now players can move freely as well. Some outside-the-box thinking on this. Whoever comes in as a coach, they've got to get a strong general manager. That's the way it works. It's professional sports now, and you got to get somebody who can handle whatever money is available and divvy it up. Keep the coach involved in that this is a player I'd like to recruit, but work it out with the general manager. This is as high as we can go. Like Wllard said, the portal opens up and you're getting run-of-the-mill players with an agent asking for $2 million. It's insane. Your total budget is going to be, as was outlined in the CBS Sports story, $2 to $4 million for the team. So, you may get a real gem of a player and you may have to pay him $700,000 or $800,000, but you're not going to spend your whole budget on one guy. It's just not going to work that way. So I got a thought, and it's not going to happen, but they got to be thinking along these lines. In addition to a coach and an athletic director, because an athletic director deals with more than basketball. He's got to deal with, he or she has to deal with football. They even have to find the right number of hockey sticks that you have to purchase every year for the field hockey team. I mean, those are things. You get a basketball general manager in the way that Bill Belichick got Mike Lombardi to go with him to North Carolina, where he is the general manager of the football team. You do the same thing with basketball. How about Bob Myers? Bob Myers is the one that built those championship teams at Golden State, and then he left, and he's been an analyst on ESPN for the NBA. But you remember, he was also involved in the coach and GM search with the Commanders. Josh Harris knows him because Harris owns the 76ers, and Myers has been in the NBA for a long time as a GM. So he brought him in. Well, what about Bob Myers? Maybe it's not something he wants to do after having been an NBA general manager, or maybe it's something he's interested in. And there is some local tie here with the Josh Harris group, with the Commanders. Maybe he keeps his hand in that too. Why not? I mean, it's got to be something along those lines. You have to not only get a coach now, but you have to get a money guy, a guy who can help you balance your budget. And if you can get more money, go ahead and get it. Lean on some people. Maybe Bob Myers leans on the billionaires who are involved with the football team. Maybe he hits Josh Harris and Mitch Rails up for money too. That's the reality of where we are. Until we get some guardrails here, a real salary cap, and contracts for the players. Well, these are the rules. This is how you dance. And this is what they're doing. So I think that you got to step back from this, and you can't think in conventional ways. Used to be you were looking for a basketball coach. You were looking for either an established guy who'd done things at another place who somehow you could attract to a school like Maryland, or you get an up-and-comer. Or you go totally nuts like John Slaughter did in a totally ridiculous move when they were in complete chaos after the Len Bias death. You push Lefty Driesell out the door, and you hire a high school coach who's never coached in college before, in Bob Wade. And the results were predictable. So, when you are looking now, you have to look either at an up-and-comer, which I don't think is the way to go with this team right now, or somebody who's done it. And the names that are out there that you're hearing, Buzz Williams, Porter Moser, who knows who they're going to wind up with. But it's got to be somebody big, I think, and it's got to be somebody quick, because the transfer portal is open and players are going to wind up at different places. And I guess even now you could decommit once you commit. I mean, there There's nobody keeping you there if you want to go to another school, and you don't have to sit out. So why not? Maybe you can make an agreement with one school and then go to another, give the money back, tear up the contract. Who knows? It's it's chaos right now, and Kevin Wllard is now finally gone, and it's time for the Terps to move on, and it's time for me to move on. All right, that's a wrap for me. Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.